6'8" Greek guard Neo Avdalas is on Gonzaga's radar. Can Mark Few really land Luka Doncic 2.0?
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Folks, we got a lot of fun today here on this live edition of Locked On Zags, recording here Wednesday, 3 p.m. Pacific time. Gonzaga reportedly contacted a European star and NBA draft prospect. We're going to talk about his game as well as a pair of transfers out of the Big West Conference that we think the Zags could pursue, potentially if they do not land their other guard target, Mario Saint-Superi, out of Spain. So we'll talk about these two Big West transfers to close out the show. But we're going to start the show. We're going to spend most of the show talking about the incredibly exciting Neo Avdalas, or Neoklis Avdalas from Greece. He is a 6'8", 19-year-old guard. That alone makes him very, very exciting. And we're talking about him because there has been reports or rumors swirling around that Abudalas has been contacted by Gonzaga among a handful of other programs where it is more known that they have contacted him. Gonzaga's kind of conversations with him at this point have been kept under wraps, whatever has happened. But there's enough rumblings out there that it makes sense to talk about him at this point. So again, 6'8", 19-year-old kind of guard wing from Greece. He played for Peristeri the last couple of seasons in Greece. This last year in 18 games and about 19 minutes per game as one of the youngest players in the league. Abudalas averaged about 9 points, 2.5 boards, a little over 1 assist per game. He did shoot 41% from three, so showcased that outside shooting ability that we know is very valuable to Mark Few and the Gonzaga Bulldogs, especially coming off a season where they didn't shoot the ball particularly well from beyond the arc. That's being generous. It was the worst three-point shooting team in Gonzaga basketball, or in Mark Few's tenure as the coach of the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Abudalas was just with Ryan Nembhard in Chicago at the NBA Draft Combine to give you an idea of how potentially valuable of a recruit Abudalas is. Most of the players Gonzaga is pursuing are not guys who are also in the NBA draft process. That is pretty rare, so a pretty good sign of his talent and upside if NBA scouts are seriously looking at him. And he is still considering going pro. And as a reminder, May 28th is the deadline for college basketball prospects to pull their name out of the draft process. So we saw that with Darion Williams, who we talked about on yesterday's episode of Locked On Zags. And in the next 7 days, we'll hear more on guys like Alex Condon. Is he coming back to college for Florida? Or even some transfers like PJ Haggerty or Jameer Watkins, who are in the transfer portal. They have until May 28th. I say that because Abudalas, as somebody who is not currently committed to a college basketball program, he has until June 15th. Which is just 11 days or 10 days before the first round of the NBA draft. So he has that long to decide whether he wants to keep his name in the draft process or withdraw his name from the draft process. Once he does that, I assume that's when there will be more kind of picking up regarding his college basketball recruitment. But again, tons of upside with this young man. He has compared himself to Luka Doncic. Others have compared him to Luka. Most people are not saying that he's the next Luka. He's going to be the same talent. Like we're not going that far. It's more play style that is the comparison, not necessarily overall talent. Very few will reach the talent level of Luka Doncic. There's nothing wrong with that. But again, his size, his playmaking ability, you watch the tape of him. There's some great video packages out there. Highly recommend checking them out. If you haven't seen them yet, you can find them on Reddit or YouTube or wherever you find your videos. There's some really exciting stuff with Abudalas. And the caveat being that watching highlights as opposed to full games is going to make anybody look good. So that is a bit of it, especially some of these grainy footage that we have of Abudalas. But you can see the appeal. You can see a player who's willing to attack the basket. You can see a player who can play on and off the ball, which I think is a valuable skill, not just for him as like an NBA draft prospect, although certainly it is, but for a Gonzaga team that, this, again, we've talked about this so much in the conversations about, Desmond Claude or Tyon Grant Foster or many of the other players Gonzaga has pursued in the transfer portal, has landed in the transfer portal or out of the recruiting spaces, Gonzaga wants guys who can play off the ball, but they also want kind of secondary creators. Mark Few loves that 2-point guard lineup. But in order for that 2-point guard lineup to work, you need somebody who can play point guard, but doesn't need to play point guard. And there is a pretty distinct difference between those two things. And I think, like we talked about it a little bit with Boogie Fland choosing to commit to Florida, which we talked about on Tuesday's episode of Locked On Zags, in terms of what that means for Gonzaga's pursuit of Desmond Claude. But one of the things that came up is, like, Florida has 2 on-ball guards in Boogie Fland and Xavion Lee, their transfer from Princeton. And there's some question on whether that's going to work. And so I think for Avdalas, he's a guy who, yeah, if you give him the basketball and let him bring it up, like we saw a lot of clips of him doing just that in Greece and playing that role even as a younger player. But there's also a lot of him showcasing catch and shoot ability, attacking closeouts where he catches the ball on the wing, pump fakes, defender gets in the air, he drives to the rim and scores. He's got a creative layup package, lots of up and unders, can finish with both hands, strong mid-range game. Like, there's a ton to really like about Avdalas's game, what he brings right now and what that upside looks like. He'd be somebody who very reasonably may only spend 1 year playing college basketball. And I do wonder how much that impacts the decision that he's going to make if he does decide to play college basketball again. He may not even do that. If he feels confident enough that his performance at the combine could lead to a first-round pick, I could see him staying in the draft, or even maybe an early second-round pick. But most of the mock drafts don't have him going in the first round. There's a few that don't even have him in the second round. So it wouldn't be a shock if he were to return to school. Now, there's one program in particular that's put in a ton of work on Avdalas, and that is not exactly who you'd expect. It is Virginia Tech. The Hokies they hosted him on a visit a few weeks ago before the combine. They've been pursuing him for a very long time. He'd be one of, if not the most decorated recruit in Virginia Tech basketball history, and they've been working hard. But Baylor has also had him on campus. And certainly Baylor has the ability to use a recruiting point that Virginia Tech does not have, which is, hey, we put guards in the NBA. Like, this is something we consistently do. Gonzaga can use that recruiting tactic. Baylor can use that recruiting tactic. Not as much for Virginia Tech, but they have been working really hard on this. Ole Miss and Kansas State are also reportedly in the mix as well. Ole Miss both these programs literally just landed players. Ole Miss, a freshman, Nico Abundalo, a McDonald's All-American, and Kansas State landing a transfer from Bowling Green. Don't know that necessarily takes them out of the running for Avdalas, but neither of those players were super cheap, so both those programs had to spend some cash to bring them in. So it's at least something to keep an eye on. And like we said, there have been rumblings that Gonzaga is in contact here. Many people expect that if Avdalas does pull his name out of the draft process officially, that the recruitment will pick up and that other programs could get involved, whether that's some of the real big names. I don't think it'll be Kentucky. They have a completely full roster at this point, but Duke's probably going to lose Cedric Howard to the NBA draft. If that happens, they may be somebody who could get involved. You could see Carolina getting involved. There's some other, again, none of these programs are known to be connected to Avdalas at this point. Heck, even Arizona, who, of course, we know Tommy Lloyd loves those international recruits from his time at Gonzaga and his time at Arizona. So, again, a program that's not connected to him yet, but I could see getting involved down the line. But obviously the fit at Gonzaga is there, not only from the perspective of Gonzaga's rich history of developing international talent, which we've seen obviously dating back to when Tommy was on the staff with guys like Rony Turioff going back a little bit farther, or Kelly Olynyk, or et cetera, Domantas Sabonis, Shemek Karnowski, you know the names, Killian Tilly. And then even more recently, while some of their more recent additions haven't all panned out necessarily, they've had some good ones as well. And I think it's something that Gonzaga's reputation across the overseas is strong. And I think that's going to help them with their international recruiting. If they land Mario Saint-Superi and Neo Avdalas, that's two really good players who would be in this system playing right away. Avdalas would come in and probably start or else play huge minutes instantly. I think that if Gonzaga were to land Avdalas, he would probably start at the 2, alongside Braden Smith, and I think Adam Miller would then come off the bench, and you'd probably have Jalen Warley at the 3. If the staff felt Avdalas wasn't quite ready to start, Adam Miller's a veteran guy who's been doing this for a long time. Him and Warley starting at the 2 and the 3, with Avdalas playing a big role off the bench, could absolutely happen as well. But for right now, I think the expectation is that he would start. But again, lots of programs in the mix here. Gonzaga far from the only school that has discovered and contacted Abudalas, but man, knowing what we know about Gonzaga's international recruiting success, their overall player development success, Abudalas coming into a system where there's not as much pressure on him to score right away. Again, Virginia Tech's the front runner right now, and they could put him in a position to be to play 32 minutes a game and average 15 points and boost his way into the first round easily. But they're also not a great team, and that can hurt prospects. Whereas you come to Gonzaga and you fill a role that's going to look more like the role you'd play in the NBA, where you're playing off the ball, you're doing some catch and shoot stuff, but you also get to display some on-ball stuff. Like I think you could transition to playing point guard in lineups where Braden Smith's not on the floor. Again, Braden Smith's probably not going to play 38 and a half minutes a game like it seemed like Ryan Nembhard did the last few years. So there's some more room for Avdalas to kind of play different roles in Gonzaga's system that would look more like the role he would fill in the NBA, which can be valuable as a recruiting tactic for Gonzaga to say, hey, come here where you'll fill a role that scouts are going to want to see. They're going to have a bunch of eyeballs on you because we're playing, Baylor and Kentucky and UCLA and all these teams, and we're going to be in the tournament. You'll get eyes on you there. And they're going to see you demonstrating the skills that you're going to show at the next level. Whereas you go to Virginia Tech, that may not necessarily be the type of player that they're wanting to see you demonstrate that you can be. So that's going to be something that I'm sure the staff is going to use to try to bring him in. And I think it could realistically work combined with their tremendous track record of developing international talent over the last 25 years. We'll have more on Avdalas. We'll have more on Mario Saint-Superi as we hear more about Gonzaga's pursuit of these two international talents. But right now, I want to move on and talk about a pair of guards in the transfer portal out of the Big West Conference who I think could be really appealing to Gonzaga. We're going to start with one of the best defensive guards literally in the entire country last year. By the way, he also shot 42% from 3. Will the Zags pursue Hayden Gray? We're going to talk about that coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, the NBA playoffs are in full swing. We saw the first game of the Oklahoma City, Minnesota series on Tuesday. We got the first game of the Eastern Conference Finals between Indiana and New York in just a couple of hours. And every night so far is delivering highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and those can't-miss moments. So whether it's a game-winning shot, a breakout player, there has never been a better time to get in on the action. And FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and during the contest. With player props, performance trends, same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. And if you are just juiced up right now thinking about Gonzaga adding some international talent to the roster and you're feeling good about that 2026 national championship, FanDuel's got them at plus 4,000. That's some big money you could make by throwing some money down on the Zags. And if you're new to FanDuel, now's the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. And if it wins, you will get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. Moving away from our fun conversation about Gonzaga's rumored, reported interest in Greek guard Neo Avdalas, and the player who is in this NBA draft process already, who is being pursued by a handful of college basketball programs. Again, we'll talk more about Avdalas and Mario Saint-Superi as we hear more about Gonzaga's international recruiting. But for right now, I want to turn our attention back to the transfer portal. Talk about a couple of guards that I've had on my radar for a while to talk about. Haven't had an opportunity to do so, but I think now's a good chance to kind of lay out, hey, here are some other options that Gonzaga could look at in the transfer portal, particularly to fill out the backcourt. And the first player I want to talk about here is UC San Diego guard Hayden Gray. Hayden Gray is a 6'4" guard, originally from San Diego. He spent the first 2 years of his college basketball career at Azusa Pacific, which is a Division II school in the San Diego area. And then he transferred up to the D1 level to play at UC San Diego, who is now in the Big West in the 23-24 season, his junior year, his first year of Division I ball. He played 33 games, started all 33 of them, and played about 33 minutes per game for the Tritons. He averaged about 9 points, 4 boards, 4 assists, and 1.7 steals per game. Shot 34% from three, and then he blossomed. He was good as a freshman, as a junior, as a first-year D1 player for UC San Diego, but then he really turned it on as a senior this last year. For those who weren't tracking Big West basketball last year, which is understandable, there was two really, really, really good teams in the Big West last year, both UC San Diego and UC Irvine. There was a lot of momentum and buzz that maybe we'll get two Big West teams in the NCAA tournament. Of course, we did not, because the NCAA tournament selection committee is still very hesitant to allow mid-major teams into the tournament, even if they had a tremendous season. UC San Diego is the team that made the big dance and gave Michigan a real run for their money in a 5-12 game in the first round. And a big part of that success was Hayden Gray. He averaged 11 points, 3 boards, about 4 assists, but he also averaged 3.1 steals per game. Folks, that led the NCAA. He led the NCAA in total steals at 110, as well as steals per game at 3.1. Those numbers are staggering. Like, that is elite level of productivity as a defensive player. And steals, again, they come in a variety of ways. He has very active hands. So many times he was just knocking the ball loose, able to do that while avoiding fouls. He's just a really jitterbug defensive player, constantly in your grill, navigates screens really well, plays the passing lanes well. Of course, that's another easy way to get steals, is to just jump passing lanes, get out in transition, get buckets that way. He was very obviously the Big West Defensive Player of the Year, and he was an all Big West second teamer. I should mention he also shot 41.8% from three last year, and on a pretty good volume, 4.4 attempts per game. That's really good combination of volume and efficiency from beyond the arc, while adding premier defense on the other side of the ball. Again, we also saw some really strong individual performances from him, especially against teams that we're familiar with. He had 11 points and 7 steals in a game against San Diego at San Diego in the non-conference. We're not going to pretend that San Diego is like an elite ball security team, but 7 steals against anybody is pretty ridiculous. He also had 14 points, 7 assists, 5 steals, and 5 boards in a big-time win at home against Pepperdine. And then in the Big West Championship game against UC Irvine, a must-win game for the Tritons. If they lose, they weren't going to make the tournament, even though they probably should have. They didn't lose, however, because Hayden Gray scored 22 points, and folks, he shot 6 of 7 from 3. In a clutch must-win game, this dude was nuclear hot from beyond the arc, 6 of 7 from 3. Oh yeah, he also tacked on 3 steals in that win over the Anteaters to push UC San Diego into their first ever NCAA tournament appearance. Now, here's the kicker with Hayden Gray. While we've talked about with Michael Ajayi and with other players who played junior college, who had junior college eligibility and then also played Division I basketball, those players are being granted an extra year of eligibility, while the NCAA determines if their junior college years should count against them in their 4-year window, or their 5-year window, their 4 years of eligibility. However, that has not necessarily been extended to Division II and Division III, because that is still part of the NCAA umbrella. So Hayden Gray has played 2 years of Division II basketball and 2 years of Division I basketball at UC San Diego. He has applied for a waiver, and there is an expectation or a belief that this could potentially be granted. It is on a case-by-case basis. I don't know how many games that Gray played at Azusa Pacific necessarily. I don't know the viability of the waiver, but that is a big question mark at this point for Hayden Gray, is if he will be granted eligibility. And up to this point, he has not been. So for right now, things are kind of quiet on the Western Front for Hayden Gray. Now, New Mexico has been connected to him because his coach, Eric Olin, who was at UC San Diego, took the head coach job at New Mexico, replacing Richard Pitino, who of course went to Xavier, who's replacing Sean Miller, who went to Texas. Either way, if Hayden Gray does get granted an extra year of eligibility, I would expect New Mexico to be heavily in the mix, as they need to replace star point guard Donovan Dent. San Diego State has been considered in the mix as well. Totally makes sense. He's from San Diego. He's currently playing in San Diego. He's a great, tough defensive guard. That's what San Diego State loves. Would not be surprised to see them in the mix. But also, you got to figure the Zags, especially if they do strike out on Mario Saint-Superi, which there's no indication they will. As for those of you who listened to the show earlier this week, it sounds like Mario Saint-Superi is happening. It just has not been confirmed yet. But if something were to happen, that were to change, and they needed some more guards, Hayden Gray makes a ton of sense. He's a veteran guard, kind of think Geno Crandall, Aaron Cook type, in the sense that he's like a senior guard who's coming to your program to come off the bench, but plays still a significant role, just not necessarily a starting role. Obviously, he's an elite defensive player. So if you had, I mean, you could realistically have a lineup next year if Hayden Gray came to Gonzaga with Gray at the 1, Emmanuel Innocente at the 2, and Jalen Warley at the 3. And my goodness, nobody's scoring on you. Yes, you're going to be a little bit limited offensively with that lineup. Innocente is not much of a scorer. Jalen Warley is not much of a scorer. Hayden Gray is a decent scorer, but he shouldn't be the best scorer out of your backcourt. But man, if they ran that lineup just for fun for a while, holy crap, nobody would be scoring on them. It would be a lot of fun to see that happen. Hayden Gray is a player I'm very interested in. I'm hoping he does get an extra year of eligibility, whether he spends it at Gonzaga or not. I think he's somebody who could be a lot of fun to watch play at a different level next year, if again, he is allowed to do so. Well, folks, we know Gonzaga's been on the mix for a Caliph Battle replacement, a high-scoring kind of guard wing type. And there's a player out of the Big West who shot 88% from the free throw line last year. He also shot over 40% from 3. Let's meet Owen Koonce to close out the show, coming up here in just a second. All right, folks, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. We're still talking Big West transfer portal targets for Mark Few and the Gonzaga Bulldogs, who started the show talking about Neo Avdalas, the Greek guard that Gonzaga is reportedly connected to, who was at the NBA Draft Combine. We also talked about Hayden Gray from UC San Diego, a senior guard who was the NCAA's leader in steals last year. And now I want to talk about another player who fits more into the Caliph Battle kind of bucket in terms of what type of role he would fill at Gonzaga. And that's Owen Koonce from Cal Poly. Koonce is a 6'5" senior guard, initially from Lafayette, Colorado. He actually walked on to the Colorado basketball team way back in the 2020-21 season. That was the COVID year. He was a walk-on there. He played just 2 games and 2 total minutes. So that season wouldn't have counted against his eligibility anyway, but it was also the year where COVID meant that nobody had their eligibility counted against them. And then after that 2-game sample at Colorado, he said, well, maybe I'll go somewhere else where I can play a little bit. And like Hayden Gray, he also played at the Division II level, playing for Colorado Mesa, which was a wildly successful D2 basketball program in the state of Colorado. So successful, in fact, that their head coach, Mike DeGeorge, was hired by Cal Poly to come straight up to the D1 level as a head coach. DeGeorge brought many players from his D2 Colorado Mesa team with him to the Mustangs, including Owen Koonce. That is how he got back to the Division I level this past season, and he was great. Bennett Sturtz from Drake last year was the high-profile D2 to D1 transfer. Every year there's a couple guys who pop. Usually they don't get a ton of attention, but Drake was a phenomenal program. Their head coach, Ben McCollum, came from the D2 level as well, and they made the NCAA tournament. They won a game in the first round. Ben McCollum took the head coaching job at Iowa. Bennett Sturtz is following him from Drake to Iowa if he doesn't stay in the NBA draft process. So while they got all the attention, Cal Poly had a starting lineup with 4 D2 players in it, and they had the best season they've had in like over a decade or close to a decade. And that was a story that got really underreported last year because any attention that the Big West did get was on UC Irvine and UC San Diego, who were both phenomenal. But Cal Poly was a fun team to watch last year. Super high up tempo offense, flying up and down the floor, scoring like 90+ points per game. It was a lot of fun to watch them. And Owen Koonce was tremendous. He was the best player on this team by far. 35 games for him, started all of them, played 30 minutes a night, averaged 17 points, 5 boards, 2 assists, and just over 1 steal per game. Like I said, he was a lights-out three-point shooter, 40.4% from deep. That was on about 5 attempts per game as well. So he shot the ball a lot, and he knocked it down a lot. We compare him to Caliph Battle. Caliph Battle liked to shoot a lot of threes too, but he was not a 40% three-point shooter at any point in his career. So for Koonce to be able to do that as a really strong sign. He was also really effective as a 2-point scorer, just under 60% on his 2-point attempts, and he was 88% from the free throw line on a little over 3 attempts per game. One of the most effective high volume scorers at the entire Division I level of college basketball last year. 17 points per game on nearly 60% shooting while shooting 88% from the line. You just don't see that very often. This kid was really, really good at putting the ball in the net. He was 6th in the Big West in scoring. He topped 20 points in 14 of his 35 games last year. He also had 25 or more points 4 times last year. A few standout performances. He had 18 points on 4 of 9 shooting from 3 at San Francisco. I highlight that game not only because it was against a team that Gonzaga played last year, but also because that was his first Division I game. 18 points, 4 of 9 shooting in a true road game against a pretty good WCC team. That's a great way to get things going for Owen Koonce. He also had 16 points, 5 boards, and shot a really blistering hot 7 of 11 from the field against St. Mary's. Went into Moraga and shot 7 of 11 with 16 points. That is impressive stuff from Owen Koonce. He also had 30 points on 7 rebounds on 12 of 16 shooting at Stanford. 30 points on 12 of 16 shooting. By the way, Cal Poly won this game, upset Stanford 97-90. An incredible game. I was watching this one live, and I was so happy that I did. Yes, if you're thinking to yourself, why the heck was Andy watching Stanford Cal Poly by himself? Like, yeah, it happens. I'm a degenerate. And I was watching this game, and I'm really glad that I did because Cal Poly looked awesome and Owen Koonce looked awesome. And anytime a dude can drop 30 on a power conference team on the road, you're going to start to pay a little bit of attention. Koonce also had 32 points and 8 rebounds on 10 of 17 shooting in an overtime loss against Mountain West opponent San Jose State. Another high-profile game for him. Now, once again, conversation we have with Hayden Gray, we have to have with Owen Koonce here too, because he played at the D2 level. Played 3 seasons of D2 ball, played 1 season of D1 ball at Cal Poly. Again, he also played the 2 games at Colorado, but those will not be counted against him, not only because it was only 2 total minutes of action, but because it was during the COVID season. But assuming that the 3 years of D2 basketball and the 1 year of D1 basketball are all used against him in the sense that his eligibility is out, the NCAA may not grant him a waiver. This is something to keep an eye on for him. I do wonder if the fact that he's only played 1 season of D1 basketball, again, the argument being made in these lawsuits is that they were not able to make money off their name, image, likeness at non-D1 levels. They can at the D1 level. Therefore, they should be granted extra eligibility because of that. It's worked with other lawsuits. It worked for players who are at the junior college level. I don't know if it'll work for players who are at the D2 level. That is what we have to remain to be seen. If Koonce is not granted extra eligibility, I doubt Hayden Gray would be granted extra years of eligibility, and these 2 guys would have finished their very successful final college basketball seasons and would be on to the professional ranks. If Koonce is given extra eligibility, I think that there'll be a lot of interest. Anybody who can shoot 40% from 3, score 17 points a game is going to draw that attention. He's not a great defensive player, but he's got the scoring touch to be effective around the rim and from the 3-point line. He's great at getting to the free throw line. He's great at converting from the free throw line. Again, Colorado might call him back and say, hey, remember when you were here 5 years ago? We'd love to have you back. Again, he's from the area, so he may be interested in that. Maybe Colorado State says, hey, you want to come to the other D1 program out in the state? Maybe Stanford and Cal give him a call so he can stay in the California area. But again, for Gonzaga, their pursuit of players like Desmond Claude and Tyon Grant Foster make me think that a player like Owen Koonce could make some sense for them. They're looking for a high volume scoring wing. Maybe that ends up being Avdalas. Maybe they get Abudalas and Saint Superi and they call it an off season. Maybe they do get Tyon Grant Foster. Maybe they do get Desmond Claude. But if not, and Koonce becomes available, gets that waiver granted, a dude who shot 40% from 3, who's a bigger guard at 6'5", who's a veteran, who's played a lot of college basketball, who's great at getting to the free throw line, who shot 88% from the line last year. This makes a ton of sense. Again, not a great defensive player, but if you're looking to fill out your guard rotation and you already have Emmanuel Innocente and Jalen Warley filling roles on the roster, you don't necessarily need to prioritize a defender more than you need to prioritize scoring and shot creation and, rim pressure. And those are things that Owen Koonce can do. has proven, and three-point shooting too. Floor spacing is crucial. You could have Koonce and Miller on the floor at the same time, potentially steal Venters too. Suddenly that floor opens way up, and guys like Huff and Ike and Diani have way more room to operate. The drivers have more room to try to get to the cup. It's going to stretch and space the defense in a way that's going to be really difficult for teams to handle Gonzaga for 40 minutes a game. Koonce is definitely a player I would have firmly on my radar, especially if he does end up getting, or really exclusively if he ends up getting that extra year of eligibility. He's going to be firmly on the radar because he's somebody that I think makes a ton of sense for Gonzaga with the roster that they currently have and what they're looking to fill. All right, folks, that's going to wrap it up for me today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. Thank you so much to those of you who have made this show your first listen or your first watch of the day, and those of you hanging out live with me here on the Locked On Zags YouTube channel. Again, hit that subscribe button. If you have not done so yet, you'll get notified whenever a new show is published or when a new show is going live and scheduled out that way. I very much appreciate all of you. Also, join the Locked On Zags Discord community. If you have not done so yet, link in the show notes. It is completely free, hanging out in there talking about all these Gonzaga rumors day after day. We'll be back with one more show this week on Thursday, and then we'll have the long, enjoyable Memorial Day weekend, and then we'll come back later in the middle of next week to get you more transfer portal updates, more recruiting updates, more with Ryan Nembhard in the NBA draft process, more from the NBA playoffs as well. Thanks again, folks. Have a fantastic rest of your day, and as always, go Zags.